Every day, experienced barristers and senior lawyers make decisions that no one ever sees. And it's not decisions about the law, it's decisions about whether to say something. A team member's behaviour, it's really not acceptable. A counterpart acts aggressively towards you in a mediation. A client needs to hear advice that you know they're not going to like. You have an unpaid invoice that is long overdue, or you need clients to put money into trust. You know something needs to be said, but you tell yourself, not right now, I don't have time, maybe it will sort itself out over time. So you end up saying nothing. And most barristers and lawyers, they only focus on one risk. What will happen if I say something? But I think they're focusing on the wrong one, because the bigger risk is often saying nothing. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to challenge the way most barristers and lawyers think about these moments. And I'll show you why some experienced barristers and lawyers operate consistently well under pressure and others don't. I'll also share the first decision I make before deciding whether something needs to be said. Because I don't think the biggest risk is saying the wrong thing. I think the biggest risk is leaving one of the most important performance decisions you'll make until you're in that moment. Before we continue, just one quick thing. I've put together a guide that takes today's presentation one step further. It gives you a practical system to apply this thinking to the conversations that you're facing right now. If you do leave before the end, you can't hang around, or you prefer to work through it in your own time, you can download it below using the link provided. Now let's start with one question. I'd like you to think about one conversation that you've been avoiding. And I don't want you to overthink it. You've already probably thought about one by now. Is it with a client, a colleague, a team member, a counterpart? And I want you to keep that conversation in mind as we go through this presentation. And I want you to ask yourself this question: why haven't you or I had it? And most people answer that question by referring to whatever is happening around them. They're so difficult. They're emotional. I know that I'm under pressure, but I know they are too. And it's not the right time. And maybe all of those things are true, but that's not the real reason. The real reason is much less obvious. What happens is we start negotiating with ourselves and let uncertainty or fear take over. And we say to ourselves, well, maybe tomorrow I'll do it. Maybe they'll be upset with me if I do say something. They won't approve of me. What will that cost me? Maybe it isn't worth it to say anything. It won't change anything. Or maybe I'm the one who's overreacting and I've read it wrong. And we've all done that. I have too. But the problem is, while you're deciding whether to speak, the situation is likely getting worse. Poor behaviour, that gets repeated. Expectations become assumptions. Standards start dropping. People begin drawing conclusions by observing you, what you tolerate and don't address, just as much as what you do. That's why these are some of the most important professional decisions that we all make. Not because every issue that we're aware of or comes to our desk needs to be addressed. It doesn't. But every decision that we make carries a risk. The risk of saying something and the risk of saying nothing. Most lawyers and barristers spend all of their time thinking about the first one, and that's a big mistake. You probably notice something. Sometimes you do speak up. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you tell the client the advice that they really need to hear even when they don't like it. Sometimes you soften your advice so that you don't get a reaction. Sometimes you address the behaviour immediately. Sometimes you hope it improves over time. So what's changing? Well, it's not the legal issue. It's not your experience. It's not your intelligence. It's the way you're operating. The problem isn't pressure. the problem is where we're focusing. We spend so much time thinking about the risk of saying something, we don't consider the cost or the cost of the risk of saying nothing. Most lawyers decide how they're going to operate when they're already in that moment, when they're already under pressure, and that's all the time when you're practicing law, when emotions are high, when somebody disagrees, when the room becomes really stressful, and that's when they start weighing everything up. Should I say something? Should I not? Should I leave it? Am I going to make things worse? How are they going to react? And then often they leave the room and hope it rights itself over time until next time they're in that situation again. This is one of the decisions that you can't afford to leave to the moment, that moment you're in that situation. But that's exactly where most barristers and lawyers leave it. But it's not where that decision belongs. It belongs before you sit down in front of the client, before the mediation, before the meeting, before the difficult conversation. And that's the difference that I've noticed between barristers and lawyers who operate consistently at a high level and those who don't. It isn't that they're more confident, it's not that they're naturally better communicators, it isn't that they're fearless. They've stopped deciding how they're going to operate once they're already in the situation. Because for many lawyers and barristers, pressure decides how they operate. High-performing lawyers, they decide how they operate before pressure, fear, uncertainty takes the wheel. Every year, lawyers deliberately improve their legal expertise. We all complete CPDs. We look at cases, study cases, build experience, and we should be doing all those things to practice as lawyers and barristers at a high level. But very few barristers and senior lawyers deliberately improve the way they prepare, perform, and lead. And most assume that experience, well, that'll take care of it. The more experience I have, that'll sort that out, but it won't. That's why preparation changes the way you operate when you are under pressure. And I want to give you an example. I was working with a senior lawyer who had been avoiding and putting off a conversation with someone in her team for weeks, and it was probably more like months. Every time they thought about raising it, she'd ask herself the same questions. Is this serious enough? What exactly do I say? Are they going to become defensive? Are they going to get angry with me? What if I make it worse? By the time she got to work every day, it was easy to tell herself, I'll deal with that tomorrow. The issue wasn't going away. It was growing. It was getting bigger. We didn't start by scripting a conversation. We started by deciding whether the conversation actually needed to happen. Then we prepared how she wanted to operate, what outcome she was aiming for, how she wanted to respond if it became really uncomfortable and the other person became reactive. Only then did we decide on how to formulate the conversation, what to say in that conversation. And the conversation wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be perfect. The issue was addressed, and afterwards, she said something that I've heard so many times before. Looking back, the conversation wasn't the most difficult part. Leaving it for so long was. They'd spent years worrying about one risk, speaking up, having that conversation. They never considered, never stopped for a moment to consider the risk of not speaking up and staying silent. What would happen if they didn't speak up? The courage matrix that I'm about to show you isn't really about courage. It's about preparation. Because preparation changes how you perform long before the conversation begins. That's why I use it. As you can see on the horizontal axis, you need to say something. Do you need to say, is it low and it goes to high? So it's a low need to say something or a high need to say something. Then you've got the vertical axis, the risk of staying silent, and again, low risk to high risk. And there are 4 decisions on the bottom left. Let it go. Sometimes nothing meaningful is gained by saying something. We don't have to give an opinion on everything. We don't have to weigh in on everything. If the issue is minor, The risk of staying silent, low. We can let it go. Then if we go to the bottom right, well, we can raise it. Sometimes something does need to be said. Not because it requires courage, because it's simply part of your role. The risk of staying silent is low, so we need to address it. Then we go up to the top left and we have to use judgment. Sometimes something does need to be said, but not by you, or not yet. This is where your judgment matters. Sometimes being courageous means that we don't have to speak first. Sometimes it means that we wait. We take time to see the big picture. Sometimes it's ensuring that the right person has that conversation. And then on the right-hand side is we choose courage. There are times where we genuinely need to say what needs to be said. The risk of staying silent is high. There's uncertainty, there is risk, the outcome isn't guaranteed. And that's where most barristers and lawyers sit asking themselves, what happens if I say something? But there is a better question. What's the risk if I don't? Because that's the question that changes your decision and the action that you take after making that decision. The important thing isn't which quadrant you're currently in. It's making sure that you've evaluated the risks, making the right decision, and then following through with courageous action if necessary. So where does this leave us? Well, that courage matrix helps us decide whether courage is required, but it doesn't prepare us for the moment that courage is required. That's a completely different skill to build that courage. But because once we've decided courage is required, well, then preparation becomes your advantage, because once the conversation starts, you're no longer preparing, you're performing. Preparation gives you something far more valuable than confidence. It gives you a standard that you can rely on, because then you stop relying on how do I feel about it, fear of what will they say, how will they react. You stop hoping that your legal experience and expertise will take care of it. And you rely on the way that you've prepared yourself to operate. And that's why preparation matters. Not because it removes uncertainty, because it removes indecision. Think about building courage and communicating courageously like building strength. You don't become stronger by thinking about lifting the weight. You get stronger when you lift weights. Courage works the same way. You don't develop courage by intellectually knowing what it means or knowing what to do. You develop it by making a decision and then taking uncomfortable, courageous action. That's why the same barrister or lawyer can deal with one situation exceptionally well, then walk away from another thinking, I could have handled this better. Not because they lacked legal expertise, because they hadn't prepared how they wanted to operate. That's why courage sits inside systems in the first phase, prepare, of high-performance lawyers. Courage is one habit. It's a decision that requires us to make decisions that then follows we're required to take uncomfortable, courageous action. But it's not the only habit. Every week you're going to face different situations, different people, different pressure. The situations will change, but the way that you operate shouldn't. That's why high-performance lawyers isn't just about one conversation. It's about deliberately improving the way you prepare, perform, and lead. So here's one thing I'd encourage you to do this week. Think about the conversation that you identified at the beginning. Run it through the courage matrix and ask yourself, does something genuinely need to be said? What's the risk if I stay silent? Make the decision and then take the corresponding action. And it won't always feel comfortable. You have to choose courage. It doesn't just automatically arise, because for many lawyers, they're operating with fear at the wheel and uncertainty at the wheel. But high performers, lawyers and barristers, they decide how they're going to operate before that fear and uncertainty take the wheel. Here's one thing that I'd like you to remember today before we go. Choosing not to say something is still a decision. Every year, you'll deliberately improve your legal expertise and experience. You need to deliberately improve the way you prepare, perform, and lead as well. So today, you've seen one framework, one decision, one example. The next week, maybe I have to deal with aggression, underperformance, perfectionism in myself, or I've got a leadership challenge, or I need to influence this high stakes room, or I need to be able to resolve this mediation where I'm up against really aggressive, combative counterparts. The guide, the conversation advantage, which is below, will help you prepare for that conversation. High performance lawyers helps you prepare for all of them.